and welcome to another programme in the series Collective Wisdoms with myself, Caroline Brennan. Now, this is the series where each week I speak to a different creative person who shares their reasons for working towards making a difference. Now, this week my guest is a sculptor and possibly a writer in waiting. His name, Alan Counihan. Now, I have to admit, one of the best things about this job is experiencing Ireland's amazing landscape. And today I have driven down to County Kilkenny. And no matter what way I look, I'm confronted by 5 sets of mountains all around me. And it is nestled in this stunning, stunning place that I finally found the small little site that Alan chose to make his home in. I began by asking him how this amazing vista helps him in the work that he does.
Sometimes when I'm working here, I can get a little bit tight in the head. It can feel like there are the palms of hands around your forehead. It's just thoughts seem to swirl around in there, and I can't resolve them. And if you want to clear your head, you can walk up 2 fields from the house and see that view, and it puts things into perspective. My father died when I was 2 months old, and so I have no recollection of the man at all. Anyway, the family home was a very, very large farm, I think 300 acres, on the site of Clover Hill Prison. What's now Clover Hill Prison, it was Clover Hill House. And he was, I think, a high-rolling businessman dealing in cattle. Well, I know that's what he was, but my thinking is that he was a high roller. Who was overstretched, and there was, I think, a disaster in that 2 shiploads of cattle, the refrigeration failed them. He was one of the first exporters of beef out of the country, and I think he lost most things. Anyway, the house was, he lost the house, and the stress, I think, killed him. He got a heart attack shortly after, and then the banks came in and took the land, took the house, the lot. So there's no memory of a family home. My mother had to go to work in England because she was a doctor. She couldn't find work in Ireland. It wasn't conducive to professional women. So we grew up with relations, boarding school. So I went to boarding school at 4. We all did. Well, I would have been the youngest. I would have been the youngest having gone. But we all went. We had to go at a particular time. So I went at 4. And so my memory is of a boarding school and then either a hotel during the holidays or relations. Some of whom didn't want us, I suppose. But people say it's terrible. Boarding school, I actually got to love it because that, children are survivors, and you find where you can be. And I learned how to manage boarding schools. I got to enjoy them. And
when you say, I got to manage boarding schools, I'm thinking, holy God, at 4 and 5 and 6 and learning to manage something, it's a big responsibility on a little man's shoulders.
Yes, but the little man doesn't think about that. I mean, the little man doesn't have or the little girl, because my sister did it too, doesn't have that adult concept. I mean, children get on with things. If there's a death in the family, they grieve at that moment, but they get on because the world is opening out ahead of them, and that was certainly the case in my instance. I didn't dwell on it.
How often did you get to see your mum when she would presumably come back and forth?
Because she was working on locums in London for the most part, I would think maybe not much more than 4 or 5 weeks a year. She would come at Christmas. During the school holidays, and then there would be maybe 2 weeks in the summer, but she was tied to the work. Yeah.
Who was probably the most significant adult in your life when you were growing up?
I can't say that because the most significant adult would have been my mother, because she was the only parent, and would have been significant perhaps even in her absence. I mean, there's nuns and things that you meet as a child who take over certain roles. So I cannot remember them now. I mean, there were powerful personalities, but we weren't emotionally attached to them. We stayed at my grandparents, who weren't that keen on, having 3 young children around in their late 70s. And if they're not getting on, they don't want this complication, And there was a touch of that, So there were good teachers. That's the people who figured my life, really.
Maybe what we'll do is we'll move away from the head and ask the question in terms of the feeling of being the little boy. Because I'm hearing the head talk at the moment. So sometimes the feelings can be much more sort of powerful in telling the story. So looking back on the feelings that you were feeling back then, what were they?
I mean, I enjoyed school. I mean, that's the long and short of it. I enjoyed being with other boys. I enjoyed just the things that children do all the time. And I was probably a bit of a rascal, and because I learned how to, I think, maybe manipulate situations. One does. I suppose when I went to Glenstall Abbey, which is a Benedictine school for the privileged middle class. We could, if my mother ever heard this, she might have, she would have difficulty with it, but it was difficult for her to afford it. She made enormous sacrifice for education because we didn't have a home, but she thought that an education was really important for us to have. And I got a wonderful education, particularly in Glenstall, and met 2 wonderful teachers there, both connected with the arts. One with painting, Patrick Doyle, and the other a man called Michael O'Sullivan, who came in as a substitute teacher. He can't have been more than 23 or 24. He was only out of education himself. And he came back, and his first day he walked into school, he really changed my life. He walked in and said, right, this is the syllabus. He said, most of the poetry on these pages is shite. He said, you fellas can do better. You're to start tonight. And every boy in that class, and I think he got all the classes from first year to sixth year to do it, he had them writing poetry. Some of it wonderful stuff. Magazines were published. He was just, he had no time for the marking system. The door to his room was perpetually open. Classical music blaring. He said, you can't sit to this. He'd take you up and dance you around the room. He really was a character, And of course, they kicked him out after a year. He was anarchic. You go up and say, I need an A for my English, right? You get an A. He was, just a fine human being. And I wrote a poem, I think, after he'd gone, when you talk about feeling. And I can't remember, but the poem did open, Michael, you've taught me how to love and how to hate. Just how to feel in the world. He did that because of so much that had happened in our childhood, we bottle things up, the 3 of us, myself and my siblings. You learned how to control feelings. And there was also running a theme in the family that gentlemen aren't supposed to show their feelings. There was a little bit of that going on too.
And you must have felt loss when this man left your life.
I did. There was, good teachers would follow on. And if you live intensely, I suppose that you do learn to deal with that. But I did. Oddly enough, about 3 years ago, after we'd moved back here, no more than that, in 2000 we moved back here, I said, I have to find this man. And I knew someone who knew where he had been teaching. I just did a few inquiries. And I wrote him a letter, just thanking him for the difference he'd made in my life. And he had retired, but they posted the letter on to him. And he called me up, and we talked, and it was wonderful. And he came to an exhibition I had in Dublin. And it was just wonderful to be that, to meet this human being again. Because he had continued to, I imagine, enrich and open young people's lives throughout his life.
Do you think that he's made an impact on you, not just as a person, but also as the artist that you are today?
I'd like to think so. Michael would think that I'm not doing the work I should be doing. Yeah, because I would imagine, thinks that I should, because what he managed to get me writing. And I wrote, I imagine when I was in that year, a poem a day and a play, a couple of plays, which he kept. He actually sent me back last year. He'd found them in a box. He sent me back the play that in my 13-year-old handwriting, and some of the poems. The poems don't bear reading, but the play does. I mean, how it transfers now or comes out in my work. I don't think it goes back to his influence, but that there's something that it's like the sun causes the flower to open. I mean, the influence of a good teacher on young lives, I think, can do that. The talented teachers are treasures in the world, and he was one of them, very definitely.
It just from listening to you there, it sounds as though that this person brought you an awareness that was new and refreshing. Were there other encouraging, and he was also encouraging, were there other encouraging people that made you believe in yourself, other adults in your life that got you to be able to believe in who you were and your capabilities?
Oh, it's funny you ask questions there that perhaps we should reflect on more often on a day-to-day basis. I mean, when I grew up, there was a wonderful woman who grew up. She was my grandmother's nanny, really, and she was a wonderful human being. She had no education. How she came to be with my grandmother for perhaps 20 years or 25 years, I have no real idea. And then she was with my mother for maybe 10 after that. But she was just this. I don't mean to sound like I'm talking down. She was a simple soul, and I mean that in the finest sense of the word. There wasn't an ounce of malice in her. And I think I shouldn't call them simple souls. You should call them refined souls. It's not complicated by you used a word earlier, it's not complicated by ego. They just want to live well, do well, not cause pain, and not suffer it. And Molly was one of those creatures. She was just, I loved her. Perhaps the fundamental thing when you talked there about feeling, I realize where the conversation is going. The conversation is going in the direction of loving. So when did someone, I think when you discover who you are in the world, you discover not just your ability to receive love, but more importantly, not just to give it, but to receive it. And that is wisdom. That took me a long, long time because of the background. I mean, the people you meet in boarding schools and stuff, you don't love, you enjoy. Maybe the person whom you love or have a complicated relationship, you don't see enough of. I had a very telling remark in my early 20s when I went to my godfather. And I was very excited because I'd met someone and I'd fallen in love. And I said, this is wonderful. I've, really met this incredible person. And he turned around and he took the carpet out from under me. He said, Alan, after what you've been through, do you think you're capable of loving? I walked out of there like I'd been punched. It really did knock the stuffing out of me. And it was in feeling the answer to that question that I perhaps discovered who I was.
Because if you had let the head take over, where would it have gone?
I think you could go to very dark places. Not long after that, I was lucky. I used to work as an actor in Dublin when I was in my, early 20s. And actors have a kind of, they live in a kind of netherworld sometimes, You get up late, you work in a dark theatre all day, you perform at night, then you go out and you drink late and you walk the streets of the city home. And it could be very intense. And I went down to West Kerry for a 2-week break and ended up staying for months. And eventually, 2 years later, was fishing lobsters off the Blasket Islands and living on them, where life was so elemental. What held me in Kerry in the first place was that I met another wonderful human being. This man's name was Bungie. he was in his 60s, I was in my 20s, and we formed this remarkable friendship. He was building a house, had run into trouble. The relationship the house was built around had fallen apart, didn't know if he should finish it. In other words, he had a dream that had broken in some sense, and then he needed to put a roof on it. It's a strange exercise, but that's what he set about doing. I clicked with this man and worked for him. He was a pretty good stonemason and stone carver. So I learned stonemasonry from him. That's really, I suppose, what happened. And I'm a doer, I like to make things. So stone mauling was something I found very, very attractive. And you're out in a remarkable environment in the west of Ireland. I took to it. And then I worked on Charlie Hoey's house in Ishvickalawn, learned a lot about it there. Yeah, just people like that enrich your life and I suppose teach you how to live.
And you talk about stone masonry, and I've spoken to people who've worked with wood, and they always say wood is alive. What's your relationship with stone?
Stone can be a devil. Stone, you're working with time. When you discover a fossil in a stone, it's quite magical. And stone, people don't think of it, but it does actually move. It opens and closes at a much slower rate than wood. But it does. I mean, limestone in particular, when it rains, it'll swell, and in warm weather, it'll shrink. It's intractable. It's hard to work. I don't think I work with it for its durability. I work with it because I learned to master it. Well, master is the wrong word. I learned how to work with it. I do a lot of public commissions, or at least I used to do a lot of public commissions. So you're working to a deadline, and it's really exciting in the design of the concept. But when you come to make it a big piece and you're working on a block which begins at 20 ton and you end up with a 7-ton piece at the end, there's an enormous amount of waste, of noise in particular, of dust, and the magic can disappear out of the process when you're doing that. And if the magic disappears in the process, it won't be found in the fruit. And that's the hard thing to keep. So when I work in stone now, I'm really interested in working on a small scale and get away from the big projects. I can go to an art gallery and I can see pieces of work, 3-dimensional, 2-dimensional on the wall. And a lot of them are, the ones that are particularly in vogue now, they call it, is a conceptual art, are works that play with how we perceive the world, and that's their cleverness, and that's why they're so popular. But they don't make you feel anything beyond a cerebral response to it. And for me, good work, you feel it. You can feel anger, you can feel grief, you can feel wonder. Wonder in particular is a great one. But you respond to it emotionally. I've had moments in my life where I would be moved to tears just by walking out on a cliff in the west. A great play can move me to tears sometimes. A painting has done it once. But you know that you're touching something, or music has done it. But you touch something fundamental and you feel it. People hope for that in religious experience. It doesn't often happen nowadays. But it's, when I say intuitive, it's felt. I remember doing this once in my 20s, trying to remember your life back like a river, following it like a stream. And don't think we do that often enough. But I tried, now whether it's an invention or not, I tried to remember the first images I had, my first memories. And I think the first memory is a visual one, because I think in pictures a little bit. That's why I do the kind of work I do. I was in a room, a sitting room like this, and it was very, very large. I remember being a large sofa in the room, I think, which I was behind. Must have been 3, maybe at the most. And people were shouting, "Look at the fox, look at the fox." We're in the country. And there's a very, very large field outside the house. And everybody's running to the window saying, "Look at the fox." And the fox that I saw on my mind is standing up in the field above the corn wearing a waistcoat. The fox I saw is one that I had imagined from a picture book, but it's the only one I could see. There are places in Ireland, particularly on the west coast, where I feel viscerally connected to. In Mayo 5000, in 1993, they made a sculpture trail as part of Mayo 5000 to create sculptures that reflected, in some way, Ireland of 5,000 years ago, because it's near the Cage of Fields, which I'd just discovered and excavated. And I made a piece there, which is the best thing I've done in my life. The nice thing is that I've gone back there and there's no echo of me in it. It's a strange thing. We made a shelter called Tiarman na Gia, the shelter of the wind, on the top of a cliff. And I experienced that cliff in a force 10 when I first came on the site. It was powerful. And I said, how can I make a piece there? And the idea is to make a piece again where this is the difficulty or the challenge in environmental art, if you like. You go into a place, you feel it, and you try and distill some of that in a form without disturbing the place and making your presence in it an addition to it. And this piece does it somehow, because we used stones off the cliff that had been thrown up by the sea and just made a really simple rudimentary shelter. And while we were making it, I mean, we're maybe 2/3 of the way through, people would come down and say, what was it? I knew we were onto something then. And then somebody also came down and said, what religion was behind it? And I knew I'd hit the jackpot. We had hit the jackpot because you're collaborating with the place. These huge seas that are breaking below you, the birds swinging above, the wind coming in. You're only collaborating. And if you get that collaboration right, it is magic. And that piece was magic. And I went back last year, and it's falling into the ways to it are falling into neglect. But the piece has changed in the sense that it's got this wonderful 14-year-old patina on it from the wind. And, there's broken bits of slab all around it where slabs have been thrown up and have broken on it. The pathways into it are eroded because the weather there is huge. And this thing is just sitting there. And there's a seat inside it where you can sit and just watch the surf. And I met someone on the way back, and he goes up and down to it on a daily basis. Didn't let on. And he said, and you know what, he said, there's a little chair in it you can sit in it, he said. Who would have thought of that? I thought it's magic. I was jealous of him, actually.
What I don't understand, though, Alan, is you were saying when you went back last year, there was no inkling that you had created this, that there was no part of you in it. Why is that such a celebration?
This is one of the things maybe about art. We mentioned it earlier, art and ego. If anybody would go and see that work in 100 years' time, and supposing I'd taken a big slab of stone, I think at one point I did have a stone way away from the piece up on the cliff with the title lettered into it, and some other detail about it. Someone had lent me a grant of some money and my name. That's been eroded or washed away, thank goodness. I only mean thank goodness that it's irrelevant to anybody in 100 years' time who comes along and sees the piece as to who made it. The life of Alan Counihan, for example, means nothing to them. So why blare it? But if the piece can instill some of the magic of the process, they'll get enough of Alan Counihan and the people who worked on it in the piece. They'll feel it. We're going back to intuitive, but the name doesn't matter. People used to say, you work in stone because you want to be remembered millennia from now. It doesn't matter a damn. It's a wonderful material to teach you patience. I used to be an incredibly impatient person and incredibly angry. And you can be neither of those things to do good work because the work requires patience. It calms you. The anger and the impatience I probably had just due to frustrations of finding a place in the world where I felt I could live well.
Your piece, Prayer Before Dying, interesting words, interesting title. Explain what that meant to you.
Just a dramatic personality, at work again. Gypsy, my wife, laughed at that. She said so many people came up to her afterwards and said, is he sick? For me, at the time, the work I'd started to do around that series was working with bone. The boats I made out of bones I would find on long walks. You walk the beach. You'll often find if you're looking for bones, you won't find them. It's when you just get into this frame of mind where the gifts come, if you like, that the pieces come. And so, in some sense, it's like I said earlier about stonework. If the process isn't magical, the work won't be magical. I've always been fascinated by, it's not morbid, just by being in the world and by death. I've always had it. The plays, the poems I used to write as a 13-year-old. The play I wrote that Michael sent me back, there were 8 characters. In 12 minutes, they're all dead. and at the title, see, we can laugh, it's great. And the title of the piece was "Only When You Come, O Death," you know. So, but I see nothing morbid in it. You know, it's about being in the world, because everything you do in the meantime, you know, you party and you dance and you celebrate and you drink your wine, do all that consciously, and life is great, you know. But it's great because you know it's going to end. I'm amazed at people who are afraid of dying. We're here because we're going to die. It's imbued, if you like. I mean, I feel it. I'm working with bells, you know. I mean, Gypsy has to laugh. She does laugh. I came up with a title the other day for a piece. I'm making glass bells, and the idea being that, you know, that if you ring the bell's gone. But I said, "Oh, Gypsy, what do you think of the title? Bell for a Lost Soul." Oh, she said, "Oh, God, Alan, stop." You know, same thing. You know, prayers before dying is the same thing.
Your epitaph. What would be on Alan Counihan's epitaph?
My response was, maybe it's the one that should go on. I have no idea. There were times years ago when I would think, oh, you know, think about a suitable one. You know, you'd have to have something funny. You know, gee, it's dark in here. I don't know. I occasionally I come up with them and I scribble them down, but then I lose them in a flood of paper in the studio. And besides, there won't be a stone. I've done enough of that during my life. There'll be no gravestone, I think, especially if I precede Gypsy.
This series is kindly made with the support of Sound and Vision, which is a broadcasting funding scheme initiated by the Broadcasting Commission of Ireland.